Predators in Uniform, a podcast and YouTube video series that discusses the most unlikely criminals. People who wear uniforms swearing to protect us against all odds. Little did we know we were about to trust a wolf in sheep's clothing. Predators in Uniform seeks to expose those who have betrayed our trust and critically look at departments of public service. This is episode 2, John Leonard Orr. John Leonard Orr entered this world on April 26, 1949 in Los Angeles, California. Orr was another male addition to the Orr family, having 2 other brothers. While it seemed like things would go well for the growing family, Orr's parents inevitably divorced when he was young. Making his way through grade school and later high school, Orr went on to join the U.S. Air Force in 1967. After shipping out to basic training, Orr was transferred to the U.S. Air Force Firefighting Division. As a result, Orr was stationed in Spain, where he married his high school sweetheart. Later, in 1970, Orr was moved away from Spain and transferred to Montana. After a decent career in the Air Force, Orr was honorably discharged in April of 1971. Despite being honorably discharged, Orr made it clear that he didn't like his commanding officers and frequently detested them. Not wanting to stay out of the action for long, Orr moved back to LA where he was born, and after applying to a series of police/firefighting jobs, his wife gave birth to a baby girl. Again, things seemed to be going well for the growing family until Orr and his wife eventually divorced not long after their daughter was born. Despite a failed marriage, Orr's career prospects were looking up. Invited to test for the LAPD, Orr passed many of the exams with flying colors except for the ones regarding mental health. Because of this, the LAPD denied Orr entrance into the field and told him that he was, quote, ultimately unsuitable for the job. Following the rejection, Orr attempted to test into the LA Fire Department. Unfortunately for him, he struggled greatly with both the written and physical tests for the job. Because of this, Orr was rejected a second time. Determined and even a little desperate to have a high adrenaline job, Orr applied to the Glendale Fire Department in California. It's worth noting that this fire department was the lowest in salary and funding in all of California at the time. But Orr didn't seem to care, and much to his relief, the Glendale department hired him in 1974. Now part of the department, Orr studied fire science at a nearby college and picked up a few part-time jobs such as working at a 7-Eleven and a nearby Sears department store as a security guard. Working to make his dreams come true, Orr applied to carry a firearm, was accepted, applied to become a fire investigator, was accepted, and later moved on to become captain of the fire department. While Orr seemed like an exceptional man on the surface, desperately wanting to serve his community, he had a dark nature to him, and even darker secrets. In 1984, October 10th, a large fire broke out at a South Pasadena Olds Home Center. The store was located in a shopping plaza, making the fire even more dangerous as it could easily spread if given enough fuel. The hardware store was completely consumed and lost in the fire, along with 4 victims. A 2-year-old child, the child's 50-year-old grandmother, a 26-year-old mother of 2, and a 17-year-old store employee. Due to the fire, investigators from Southern California met at the scene to determine what type of fire they were dealing with. In the end, it was determined to be an electrical fire, not arson. Despite this, Orr was adamant that the fire was an arson. In fact, he was quite vocal about his opinion. Many came to the conclusion that Orr pressured investigators to declare the fire an arson because he was responsible for the building burning to the ground. Essentially, Orr wanted credit, and if the fire was classified as electrical, his arsonist persona would suffer a huge blow to the ego. At first, it seemed that the fire really was accidental and even a one-off event. But Olds burning to the ground wasn't the only suspicious fire that plagued California. After a fire investigators convention in Fresno in January of 1987, several strange fires began to pop up in and around Bakersfield. Investigations soon developed regarding the sudden outbreak of fire, and much to everyone's surprise, a partial fingerprint was recovered from the scene of a fire. It was plastered onto a piece of notebook paper that acted as part of a time delay incendiary device. The investigation, led by Captain Marvin G. Casey of the Bakersfield Fire Department, resulted in a profile stating that the person responsible for the fires was from the LA area, more specifically, a fire investigator from the LA area. Interestingly, no one looked at Orr, at least not yet. While researching the case, it seemed strange that no one picked up on his behaviors, like showing up to the scene incredibly fast or being able to point out a mysterious fire's exact spot of origin when no one else could. I have to admit that hindsight is always 2020, so throughout my research, I gave Casey some slack. But paying a little more attention to details such as those would have saved tens of millions of dollars, according to some reports. It wasn't until 2 years passed before any other incidents occurred. But, like before, during a 1989 fire investigators conference in Pacific Grove, California, more fires broke out. And, just as before, Captain Marvin G. Casey was responsible for investigating the outbreak of arsons. In order to gain a list of suspects, Casey compared a list of attendees for both conferences and came up with a list of 10 names. Each of the 10 individuals had attended both conferences. While this may seem like an easy catch due to the partial fingerprint being found at the first string of arsons, all 10 people were cleared, including Orr, as none of their fingerprints matched the partial fingerprint held in evidence. Again, it took only 2 years before more fires plagued California, only this time a conference wasn't involved. Whoever was responsible for the crimes had clearly caught on to the investigative techniques being used, and considering the close call of the partial fingerprint, whoever was responsible needed to be more careful, which meant that Orr, instead of targeting specific sites associated with fire conferences, made a move to set fires all through the LA metropolitan area. Despite this change of MO, investigators were able to recognize the pattern of arsons, and LA put together what was known as the Pillow Pyro Task Force. This was a reference to some of the arsons that were set by igniting pillows. Orr would light a cigarette, place it with 3 matches, wrap it in yellow writing paper, and tie it together with a rubber band before depositing the incendiary device in linen stores, usually amongst pillowcases. This would cause fast-burning fires once the cigarette burned down enough to light the matches and paper. It gave Orr enough time to set up the device, leave for an extended period of time, and then act surprised when a fire caught. Now that that little history lesson is done, we can continue with the current timeline. Once the task force was formed, Tom Campuzano of the LA Arson Task Force circulated a flyer through the Fire Investigators Regional Strike Team, which stands for FIRST. This team consisted of smaller city fire departments. The flyer described the MO for the arsonist at large. A gentleman within the meeting on March 29, 1991, Scott Baker, recalled Captain Casey's investigation and initial theories. Presenting the information to Tom, the investigation was reopened, and this time Orr's fingerprint was a match to the partial print found in earlier investigations. With more developed fingerprint technology, Orr was officially the prime suspect. In fact, the partial print was an exact match to Orr's left ring finger. Now you may be thinking, sweet, they have their guy, go arrest him. Well, that's not what happened. A fingerprint isn't a dead giveaway that Orr started the fires. It only solidified that he was at the scene of one particular fire and might have touched some evidence. And given the fact that he was in fire investigation, he had a bit of built-in plausible deniability or some semblance of an alibi. Because of this, law enforcement monitored Orr for months and even placed a tracking device in his car to account for his exact whereabouts at any given moment. It wasn't until 1991, when Orr was leaving another fire investigators conference, that he noticed the tracking device. Horrified by the discovery, Orr drove to a nearby police explosive range, convinced the device was a bomb. From there, police notified FIRST and the Pillow Pyro Task Force. To cover up the fact that the bomb was actually a tracking device, police told Orr that the device was a hoax. What Orr didn't know was that while a tracking device was placed on his personal vehicle, a second device was placed on his city vehicle. For a while, the tracking devices yielded little evidence until they confirmed Orr's presence at another suspicious fire. It was then that a grand jury passed down a formal indictment, leading to Orr's arrest on December 4, 1991. Orr was charged with a series of fires, all of which excluded the Olds fire from 1984 in South Pasadena. Even though Orr wasn't officially charged with the Olds fire, it was reinvestigated. Ironically, officials also discovered that Orr had written a book that bore striking similarities to his crimes. The main character, Aaron Stiles, was basically a self-insert for Orr, though he adamantly denies it. Despite this, one particular fire in the book mirrored the Olds fire. For anyone curious, the book title is Points of Origin, which honestly isn't that bad of a title, though I hate to say it. But no matter how creative his book titles are, Orr couldn't escape justice. A series of trials stretched from 1992 to 1998, including a plethora of arson charges, first-degree murder charges with special circumstances, and more. In all, Orr was sentenced to a crap ton of prison time. The murder charges alone landed him a sentence of 4 concurrent terms of life in prison without the possibility of parole, and that doesn't include time served for his arson charges. To protect his identity, Orr is currently being held in prison under an alias. While remaining anonymous for most of his prison time, details regarding Orr's crime spree have come to light, specifically his sadomasochistic sex life. Essentially setting fires helped Orr get his rocks off. Watching things burn sexually aroused him in ways a partnership couldn't. It was this deviant sexual identity that helped fuel, no pun intended, his arsonistic behavior. To this day, many FBI agents and fire investigators conclude that Orr is the worst serial arsonist to ever exist. But Orr got what he wanted in the end, which was fame. His crimes have been documented and retold countless times. So, in order to make this a little less about him, I want to tell you about the poor, beautiful people that died in the Olds fire at Orr's hands. Matthew Troidel was a young, bright-eyed 2-year-old boy with an entire life ahead of him. He could have been anything he wanted and done anything he wanted, but his life was cut impossibly short. Reports state that Matthew was already walking by the time he was just 7 months old, and even going so far as talking in full sentences by the time he was 1. Marie Troidel, Matthew's maternal grandmother, says he was very intelligent. Ada Deal, 42 years of age, and Matthew's maternal grandmother, also died in the Olds fire along with her grandson. A caring grandmother and a kind woman, Ada loved her grandson more than anything, and in a fitting manner, both Ada and Matthew were buried beside each other. Aside from the 2 family members, 2 store employees perished in the fire as well. One was Carolyn Krause, 26 years of age. Krause was the loving mother of 2 young children when she died just 7 feet from the exit. She was married to a police officer assigned to the Los Angeles Police Department's Hollywood division. She never got to see her kids grow up or accomplish major milestones like high school or college graduation. Her life, like those of the other victims, was snuffed out far too soon. But Krause isn't our last tragedy. Another worker, Jamie Satina, was only 17 when she too died 7 feet from the exit. When asked why neither Krause or Satina could make it through the exit, Deputy Stephen Lee stated that the smoke was so thick neither of them could likely see the exit. All 4 victims were beautiful people with loving families and a plethora of memories to be made ahead of them. No one should be scared to go shopping or go to work because of people like Orr, and what happened was a devastating tragedy. I am thankful, however, that given the severity of the fire, more people didn't die. Reports state that when the blaze occurred around 8 p.m. on a Wednesday night, 10 customers and 7 employees managed to escape the billowing blaze. Had Orr been vindictive enough to block the doors or even the exits, the death toll would have been much higher. I can only hope that those who did die didn't suffer long. I truly hope and pray that they simply fell asleep or slowly unconscious from the smoke, and even if they burned to death, they didn't feel it. As for Orr, I can only hope that one day he'll experience the pain he caused so many people, victims, and families. May he rot in hell.